Okay, we are live. This is the second session of the Post-Trump Futures Symposium. I'd like to thank all of our special guests. We have Victor McGill, Sohail Inayatullah, Mike McCollum. I'm John Sweeney, and we also have Heather Fries on as well. So welcome to all of our guests and the millions watching around the world. It's a little bit early. I was supposed to actually be in Europe for this, but it's almost 5 in the morning, so I get the joy of waking up and talking directly about Trump first thing. So if you had a chance to watch any of the first session, or you've seen any of the kind of literature promotion materials about this, we really want this to be an open conversation to support and essentially take further a lot of the issues and questions that came up in the special issue. So how is it that we can talk about agency? How can we talk about politics? What futures do we find to be plausible, probable, possible? And how do we make sense of this sort of Trump phenomenon moving forward? I think just as a quick anecdote, one of the things that I found quite interesting and certainly an issue or a challenge with futurists is to continuously bring the future into the present. And I think what we're seeing repeatedly is that, you know, the Trump event has been so profound and it's disrupted our manufactured normalcy field to such an extent that it's quite difficult to see past it, even for a number of futurists. So again, this is really a chance to have a conversation about what we think are those possible futures and how we can think about viable pathways, hopefully, towards our preferred future. So at this point, I'll throw it over to our guests. If they could quickly just give a little bit of an introduction as to who they are, and then we can get the ball rolling. So Mike, you want to start us off?
Thank you. My name is Mike McCallum. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I'm a New Zealander originally, and I was recently in Oxford at the Oxford Forum for the Future, and there was an American there called Ken Ackland, who comes from Oregon, and he describes himself as a magician, which I think will resonate with Victor's view of the world. And when he hands out a business card, he has a pack of tarot cards, and my card, which I picked out of the deck, was the Fool. And it strikes me that the story of the Fool in tarot is those that can say the things that no one else is prepared to say. And I think that is the question for the futures community. Are we prepared to act as the Fool? Thank you.
Fantastic. That sounds phenomenal, Mike. Okay, Sohail, let's go to you.
I live all over Southeast Asia and Australia and work in there's a number of countries doing foresight work. So in terms of, I think both of you are right that it's how to bring the future to the present and also how to disrupt. So I think the third point, which is partly what this is about, is are we surprised? I know personally in terms of the present local politics, I was definitely surprised in terms of national politics. However, just a moment stepping back, if we look at other countries in Europe or Africa or Asia, it was not a surprise. He seems like a typical, in terms of the old style of politics, a typical, and here not insulting Asia, but a typical Asian dictator. Very much nepotistic, very much short term, very much let's just do this for my country. So in that sense, it's not at all a surprise. So it's not something so much out of the norm. It's just surprising that the U.S. has gone that way. It's not surprising it's archetype in terms of who Trump is, in terms of kind of archetypes of global politics or local politics, especially national politics. It's like, oh, finally, U.S. in a way is catching up to Asia. If you see history as cyclical.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Sohail. This is definitely something we want to continue to talk about as we go forward, and how, again, the Trump phenomenon is seen from different perspectives and how we contextualize that. Victor, let's go to you. I know we're having a small issue with the video, but if we can give it a shot, and hopefully it'll work. Victor, can you hear us okay? I hope it's not the Trump effect, but let's see.
The voice has been silenced.
Yeah. Certainly, I think some of us have been struck speechless by what we've seen and heard recently. That's certainly the case. Okay, it says Victor is here, but we're not getting anything back. So how about we, if we can get
John, maybe while you're trying to sort Victor out, if we could start to just extend this "Are we surprised?" view from my perspective. And by the way, you know, I'm clearly not a US citizen, and I mean no disrespect to people in the US, but I have been through in my life 37 states. I think it's a country of amazing beauty and incredible richness, which I'm not sure, in fact, is being used in the wisest way. And I say that with respect. So, having said that, it just strikes me that, in a sense, Trump is symptomatic of a system that is completely broken. He is simply a manifestation of the things that people fear, and he is showing them in stark relief what that fear looks like. And I think that that's a product, which is one of the things I try to say in my article, of a particular kind of thinking that we inherited from the Greeks, and of course has influenced American politics, because we see that in the architecture and the columns of the Senate. And that is the idea that you know, everything can be cast as opposites: good, bad, fair, not fair, great country, poor country, whatever the line. And you'll see in his rhetoric, as in the case of many other people, people keep drawing reality on some kind of spectrum. And what I want to argue, and I'm sure Sahel will as well, is that in fact reality doesn't live on a straight line of opposites. It lives in the contradiction between the two. It may be something else entirely, and it may be both. And I think that we need, therefore, to have a much more sophisticated dialogue than we're having at the moment. I see those that try to lead the world through casting themselves on one end of a line or another, as in a sense both slightly evil and completely misguided, because the complexity of our world simply cannot allow that. And the other thing, of course, that line does is it puts humans at the center of everything, which in my view is part of our existential problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mike. One of the things I was really struck by in your piece was, you know, you talk about the illusion of certainty, and I feel like you're calling into question these kind of binaries. Really made me think about, and also I think we've seen this discourse in a number of different venues. Is with Trump in particular, are we really seeing a kind of conservatism that is actually embracing post-modernity in ways that maybe we didn't quite expect or anticipate? And I think you mentioned the kind of contradictory nature of a lot of the discourse, and how we've seen sort of speaking to the kind of fear mentality. It's been quite fascinating to see that play out as something that has been, on the one hand, very calculated, but also quite fluid and quite dynamic and quite responsive. So maybe we could jump to you for a response, and you could couch that in the context of your piece.
Mike is saying that you have to see him as a symptom, and if you see it that way, if you go to your comment about postmodernity, if you go back to kind of ancient views of language, it was very much language was magical. Language was the mantra. If you speak the word, it becomes real. And then you saw a shift in terms of modernity, that language describes reality in neutral ways, in objective ways. And the whole part of critical theory, what most of us have been part of, is, well, actually language constitutes reality. We don't speak English. Further and said quickly, well, actually what that means is I can say what I want. Subjective, let me use words for whatever purpose I want. Thus, whether he believes, I don't think he even believes in good or evil. He believes, let me use the language to get what I want, which is a will to power. Yep. The postmodernity is, let's bring multiple voices in. Let's see our bias so we can create a different type of world. He's turned it on his head. So no, let me use language any way I want because nothing is true. And our point is, no, everything is true. Let's look at the price of language, as Shapiro or Foucault would say. And so he's totally twisted the notion of subjectivity into power of language to create worlds he wishes. So that leads to the whole notion of alternative facts. And of course, we're seeing is the abuse of language for short-term political means. We saw that earlier in terms of the will to power, rise of fascism. So it politically, for most of us, it's a dangerous move. Now, Sorokin comes in, the macro historian, so this is about patterns. He says, if you look at the nature of reality, what in fact is real? He said, position one is, reality is physical, it's a material world. Position two is, reality is spiritual, it's ideational, it's ideas. So each one of those two positions leads to different type of systems. Position three is it's both and. It's physical and spiritual. Now, Sorokin's other point, which is relevant to what Mike and you were saying, is, well, you have two other positions. One is that, in fact, it's the wrong question. And the fifth most important position is no one can know. So if no one can know, which is Trump's perspective, then, of course, we can't agree, and the person who has most power wins. So he's figured out how to do that. So those of us, again, this is a symptom of a grand transition. We want to see a world without binaries. He's saying, this is clever. Let me use this new language in a way to win power. So he didn't use the new language to create a more spiritual, multicultural, globalistic, more environmentally friendly world beyond dichotomy, far more nuanced, complex. He used it to simplify the world so he could win. In that sense, he's really clever, whether he knows it or not.
Well, look, it seems to me, Suhail, that in a funny kind of way, and I really do hope that Victor is able to join the conversation, that in a sense, he is one of the last great magicians because he's promising things out of thin air that most of us will find hard to materialize. I think he's also a magician of the maniacal tradition. Mani, of course, was a very twisted soul who informed St. Augustine, among other things, out of the Iranian tradition. So it's a bit ironic. But I think that that's interesting. I think that in the sense that Trump has created this magical, and I hadn't thought about this before, this magical world where he has promised everything to people who can see that the system is failing. So the magicians are coming to the fore at a time when no one can chart a way forward. And I think that the issue therefore for the futures community and for those of us that think about these things is, can we now start to help people build narratives, imaginations of anticipation and aspiration that in fact allow an alternative to emerge, which is not dependent on that system that's completely and utterly broken.
Yeah, I'd like to take up this point a bit and to tie these together. It really, for me, goes back to the work of Fred Pollock, right? And the idea of the image of the future and how we feel like we're being pulled or we're being pushed. So certainly in the States, and I actually was out of the US for a few years leading up to the election of Trump, but had the chance to come back a number of times, and mostly it was to the coast. So I got a chance to go to New York and San Francisco, but my family also lives in Atlanta in the southern US. And certainly it was interesting to see this image of the future that emerged and how that was supported. But I think this long view, even if it's not sort of the macro history, but seeing this is something that really emerged with the rise of a certain kind of conservatism in the U.S., right, that blossomed and was escalated through Fox News. And so I wanted to then bring in this question about media and mediation, and to see how you both felt that fit into this, and specifically what we think the ramifications might be for the future. And Sohail, you've already mentioned the alternative facts and fake news. And when we think about the fool, and we think about these kinds of narratives, and we think about the potentiality to have a truly kind of postmodern pluralist type of political discourse, one of the things that's at the heart of this now is how do how do we gauge the sort of signal to noise challenge, right? How is it that in the age of Trump and these post-Trump futures, I think the futures we want to see, we find constructive and creative ways to use what are very clearly the most powerful communication tools in human history for egalitarian means, right? And to not sort of be, continuously driving this type of, reptilian discourse. So again, just to throw that out there as something to bring in, because I know that thinking about information and communication was I felt, both interwoven into your pieces.
I mean, what I like in terms of what you're saying, both your points is, I mean, Al-Qaeda and Daesh figured out what Trump figured out. There's a group of people who are the losers of modernity. And how do I access them? In terms of radicalism in the South, there's been mullahs, priests in villages, young unemployed males in cities with a huge youth population. They have no future. How do I sell them a vision of the future where they're important in it? In both cases, they've done the same thing with different demographics. Now, with the weakness in both your positions, it's very much around my ethnic group wins, your ethnic group loses. My nation state wins, your nation state loses. I think all of us in the futures community, we're very clear. This is, people say, well, it's the end of the world. I always tell them, well, it is the end of a world. That world has already ended. We're very clearly in a transition to a different type of future. And if you wanted to decide, how do I make sense of today's environments? I always ask people, well, what is your preferred future? In terms of what you're doing today, is that leading towards it or further from it? So it's almost like that game of hide and go seek, warm or cold. Are you getting warmer or colder? So once we get clear, going back to Polak, here's a vision of the future, am I going towards it? And in both the Trump and the ISIS Daesh view, well, actually, maybe for them in the short run, they get what they want, but the contradictions in the long run are very clear, both fail miserably. And I'm happy to spell those out, but I'll stop there. It's a short run, it works in terms of the use of language, use of us and them. In the long run, it fails miserably because we're in this grand transition. In this grand transition, we're uncertain, people don't know what to do, they're looking for something solid. Our message in a critical view gets to be too nuanced, too complex. I know when I'm giving lectures, people say, just tell us the future already. I said, well, no, the whole process is a deep learning where we all enhance our capacity, our capability to make a shift. And they want simple answers.
Right. John, and I'd like to bring you in on this conversation as well, if you could. What I'm hearing from Suhail is actually that in a sense, futures is subsumed into macro history, which is the study of large-scale social systems over time. And I think with due respect to many people who practice futures, some of them either don't know that or they don't practice it. And I suspect that we're now at a time when some deep thinking is required in our community about what it is that we are trying to do and for whom. And so I would call that within a macro historical context, foresight transformed. So I think that that's on the fringe right now of our community. I think it's difficult for us. But our role, it strikes me, and I don't want to die on being the fool the whole time, is that our role is to start to facilitate, engender, and encourage perspectives and a-perspectives of the world that help people see a different way of being. Because the reality is that the way of being that we have right now, which has nothing to do with Donald Trump or anything he may do in his legacy, is clearly unsustainable. It's unsustainable in terms of the human family and the tensions between the haves and the have-nots. It's unsustainable economically, and it's unsustainable in terms of our relationship with the planet. By the way, the planet doesn't need us to save it, it will simply change to protect itself. The unfortunate consequence of that is that doesn't include us. These things are all kind of coming together at the same time, and the question is, how is it that we wish to act? How do we help organizations make sense of a world that is not mechanistic anymore? How do we help communities find a new civic that gives people work and meaning and the ability to live in a world of unemployment and AI and artificial intelligence? How do we create viable communities when the whole democratic ethos in which I was brought up on has been completely trashed as we have countered so-called terrorist threats? So, you know, I think there are a lot of questions in here, and there isn't, this is a period of chaos and contradiction and complexity, which I know is where you sit. And our role, I think, is to be small and humble voices that just help people navigate their way through it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the things that I've been interested in recently, and also your invocation of the fool reminds me of this, one of my favorite aphorisms from Nietzsche, and Sohail's already mentioned the will to power, and that is the story of the fool going into the village and proclaiming the death of God. And there's this moment where the people can't hear him, right? It doesn't make sense to their ears. And so I think, your point about the field and how we as futurists engage on this topic, and I think the invocation of macro history is a powerful way to do this, helps people to see the long view, both past and future, and gives them a means to digest that, right? So it does become something that's empowering rather than debilitating. And again, as someone who's also championing and coming from the post-normal perspective, sometimes you see that happen, right? Some people can easily shut down because it's simply too much to bear, right? There's a bit too much to process. So
yeah,
how
sorry, and one of the things, and look, I'd love you to comment on this, Sohail, is one of the key challenges, and I find this very hard, even though I live on the bottom side of the world, is I am deeply embedded in the Western knowledge systems. And we need to learn to open up our knowledge system and accept that it is simply one of a number of knowledge systems that need to sit alongside each other in the future, because the reality is, the history of the last 100 years has been the imperialism of our knowledge system at the expense of everything else. We think we know everything, and if we don't know it, nobody else does. That's not the kind of future. So the knowledge systems of the global South, the knowledge systems of India, which Sohail is deeply embedded in, and Islam and Indo-America and China, are simply not being heard in the conversation. And we need, and in the complexity, one of the things we need to do is actually say, yes, we have knowledge, and yes, we have important things to say, but so do other people.
Yeah, and go ahead, Sohail.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if we flip that to look at the political dynamics and some of the emerging discourse around what this Trump effect might be for certain futures, to think about China then emerging, right? Certainly, if we can distinguish between China and the future space versus China emerging as a power and the kind of soft power it's exercised, but also now it's clear indications that it wants to take a more broad role from a leadership perspective, and what that might mean, certainly on issues like climate change, I think is really fascinating. So, Sohail, you were going to say?
No, I mean, I think bringing back macro history here, if you look at the three people I focus on in this article is Khaldun, Sorkin, and Sarkar. And Khaldun's point is, of course, when there's decline, the decline continues until there's someone outside the system. And the person outside the system challenges what leads to a new type of system. So that's what I find people, okay, so this is what's going on. We're in the middle of a decline. Now, Sorkin in the Trump case is far more interesting for me, because he's saying when people get into despair, I said, well, always find the pendulum. And here the pendulum is multifold. Pendulum one is you have complex, multiple voice, pluralistic system. Pendulum, and then it goes the other side, which is the sword, here's the truth. So in the short run, if you look at Obama's attempt, let's be open, let's be pluralistic, that captures the imagination of many people, then it swings again to know here's the truth, even if it's a lie. Now people get into despair to say, wait a second, it's going to swing back. But that's one way. There's a knowledge pendulum going on, and we're in the middle of it. Pendulum two, which is really between this kind of health, compassion, openness, and then Trump saying, no, it's the short term. It's the right answer. Now, the thing in the US that didn't change, so we see Trump, Obama to Trump, but in terms of the deep structure, what Mike was saying, symptomatic, there's no shift in gun, nation state exceptionalism. Obama, as much as I admire him, is as guilty as Trump. It was still within that soft heart, neither one willing to change the entire game, which is what both of you are saying. How do we transform the entire world system that is truly pluralistic or a different type of global governance? So I think the advantage macro history gives us in foresight work is to not just get stuck on a scenario, but see these patterns. So if I can see the Sorokin pendulum, I don't get too excited, nor do I get too depressed. I know these things go back and forth. When I look at the Khaldun decline, I'm always asking, okay, at the end of every decline, there's the Bedouins outside the system. Who's outside the system today? In the Islamic world, Daesh was outside the system. They've challenged it at a core level. Trump, even if you dislike it, is challenging the rationality of the Western American world system. He looks like he's continuing it, but he's challenging it at a core level. You can fire who you want, you can do what you want, you can forget about separation of powers, you can just do anything you want. So in a way, and that's challenging the core relationship, and everyone's wondering, what do we do here? So he's disruptive to himself and to others, even though he doesn't know it. In that sense, you know, this is really good news.
That's right. So I can't quite get out of my head the image of Trump is actually a golf cart. You know, he certainly sits in one often enough. He might as well be one. But that's the fool in me. But I think in a more serious level,
why?
Trump is a golf cart. I mean, he looks like a golf cart. He sits in the golf cart. He wants to be separate. He wants to be different, and he wants to express a particular view of the world. But look, on a more serious level, I think that this notion of the rediscovery, I think, of macro history as part of the futures narrative, and you know, Sohail's been part of it for a long time, I think is particularly important. And what you see with Trump is a particular view of how you manage time, what shapes in the world are important, what spaces in the world are important, what forms are important. And he prosecutes those in a very venal way without regard for anything else. So the potential, I think, for us is to help people explore time, form, and space in different kinds of ways.
Well, I mean, this is the reframing, right? He's figured out time is if you have attention on yourself. Where us in foresight has always been about long-term bringing in others, open spaces. So in that sense, he's very clever. I mean, Hazel Henderson talked about that 20 years ago. We're moving towards the attention economy. So his goal is always to frame everything within his frame.
I have to disagree with you. I don't see Trump as clever. I see him as a fortunate representation of a completely dysfunctional system.
I'm okay with that. He doesn't even know that he's clever. I don't even want to debate that. But we're having a forum about him. His ability to construct a debate is whether clever or genius or symptomatic, it's working.
Well, this is an interesting point.
Kind of like someone who thinks he's entitled to the world that I think makes him the fourth generation.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think we agree. It's a Khaldunian decline. It's the end of an era. Money is stuck. It's shrinking. The things he promises he can't deliver. We all know he's typical of a great transition. Something else has to emerge from this.
Right.
And all of us are very clear what that's going to look like. And he may be helping create that in ways that I find surprising.
Yeah.
He's dismantling the world system. He's dismantling the nation state system.
Yeah,
he's dismantling climate change. So people are saying, oh my God, US isn't going to lead. Let's figure it out ourselves. It's like the strong father suddenly says, well, I don't really care anymore. I'm going to go ahead and affair with the golf cart. That means if the strong father is going to have an affair with the golf cart, let's all figure it out and do what's right.
Well, it's quite clear that he has, because at the G7,
energy. Like, well, U.S. won't lead. We're going to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And at the G7, it was quite clear that he preferred the golf cart to the other leaders, which is a pretty interesting idea. But look at the same time, so the question then really is, for the futures community, this is, I think, a sobering time for us. I think this is a time when never before have the skills, the attributes of most of the people I've met been put on the table and say, here's a time of real stewardship for the future. You know, what is your contribution to defining what humanity will be in the 21st century? Now, I'm sure some of my colleagues will go, well, I don't want to do that. I just want to do the futures of whatever. But I think that there's another group inside the futures community who, with some trepidation and with great humility, have, I think, real opportunity. And I think that's a conversation we now need to have, you know, under the leadership of people like yourself. I think that's where we're at, because in contradiction and chaos, the capacity to see new patterns is something that comes only if you hold the space open for a little while.
I mean, for us, I think the tension is between, I mean, you know, one of our colleagues, he kept on talking about he sees foresight now as prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's fantastic. And what he's saying, I agreed upon: a global governance system, gender equity, a Gaian system. His values were exactly mine. I said, yes, but the tension with that is our role is to enhance capability and to always create alternatives. So if you move towards prophecy, you forget the fool. If you move towards prophecy, you forget the one who, you know, creates energy, whatever that energy is. So that tension we all have to have, because the person who says they're humble, I mean, they're always lying, right? Anytime a minister stands up and says, I'm going to give a speech, I'm very humble, he said, oh my God, the person's total psycho. We know that. So that's that tension that I think we need both of. So I'm agreeing with you. Yes, as foresight practitioners, we get this is a major transition. We need to be sharing, here's a vision of a new future using macro history. At the same time, I feel I have to be very clear that I'm here to enhance capability in everyone I meet, and to get them reflective about themselves and me be reflective about myself. I don't want to get lost in prophecy predictive space. Whether it's, even if I agree with it, that can lead to, again, the Trump effect, where we become unconscious of who we are. And my sense is we really don't want to go there.
Well, sorry, John.
No, I was going to say, I think increasingly we're seeing this space sort of blur over into futures, right? We're seeing the rise of predictive analytics. We're seeing a really strong narrative around data and the kind of, you know, models for evidence that we use going forward. And one of the things that I was always drawn to with futures and having a background in history and having that be my first degree as well was that, okay, we can't have evidence or facts about the space. We need to keep it a space of openness, keep it a space of you know, possibility, right? And that there is a real strength to that, and that in and of itself is a radical political move, right? Not just to imagine and create the preferred future, but to continuously decolonize the future. And I think, Mike, to go back to your earlier point about the field, then I wanted to introduce not and maybe not use the word complicity, but how is it that futures has been, and certain kinds of futures and certain kinds of foresight, not been able to generate the kinds of, I think, futures that we like, right? And I think, Mike, you were articulating this well when you talked about how is it that we need to be humble, and how is it we really need to take stock, right, as a field, and to decide what it is we really want to do. And I think to throw back to Sohail's point about, okay, if we continuously keep this open, but realize always that we do have a preferred future, and that preferred future fundamentally is about a more egalitarian, a more just space, and then how do we continuously negotiate that as practitioners, as researchers, as people who are obviously invested in the field, and not just, you know, using it for design aims or you know, a particular kind of new product or something. So, Mike, you were going to say?
No, look, I was just responding because Sohail has always been on at me to create the right kinds of metaphors. I can see he's laughing. But I think that the one of the fool in the traditional sense is actually quite appropriate, because if the fool overreached themselves, then they got hung or something. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. I think that the art here is, in fact, to ask the questions that we know are sitting in other people's heads in a way that actually allows them to find ways forward with their communities. So as I say, it's holding spaces open to allow other patterns to emerge. It is not, and I am with Sahel, it is, the art of prediction is a very dangerous path for the fool. And they may be right, they may be wrong. Either way, they will still end up being hung, I suspect. So I think it's an interesting thing, and because if we are truly moving from one system to another, then we don't have a lot of guidance. You know, we are in a sense trying to make sense of emergences, as D'Souza Santos would talk about it, that are of a new sociology that's really quite different, and therefore no one has a piece of it. You know, in that sense, it's something we will have to discover together. So, you know, for me, it's both a lack of certainty in terms of what I know I can take with me, even in terms of process. It's also, I think, knowing that, trying to find, you know, opening up other knowledge systems, and also trying to, and it's really difficult because Sahel has talked about this a lot. We are deeply trapped by the episteme in which we're located, highly mechanistic, devoted to perspective, highly rational. But there is beyond that space, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, so I think that's something that, again, a lot of the pieces touched on, and hopefully we've got Victor on now with a solid connection. Victor, can you hear us?
I can. I mean, I've only just got on, and I've missed everything that's gone before, so I'm not quite sure how I might fit in.
No, that's okay. We're just going back and forth, talking a lot about the kinds of discourses we're seeing playing out, how we can bring in macro history to bear on this. And Mike, I think, has given us a really interesting metaphor for the field and futures, talking about the fool and how we can continuously speak the unspoken. There's the card. And find new ways of engaging and challenging people to really think about post-Trump futures and not to be mired in the tyranny of the present. So yeah, we'll throw it to you, and if you have any insights, and if you could speak a little about your piece, I think it'd be nice to interject that and use that as we have about 10 minutes or so left.
Right, okay. Well, it's interesting that you're talking about the fool, because that is a character from an archetypal character. And what I did with my paper was sort of thinking that, you know, what is happening is so extraordinary that there's no way that just a rational story would make sense of it. So I turned everybody into fairy story characters. And so Trump became the jester king. The story sort of unfolded from there, where, the existing king got called away on matters of state, and the jester jumped up on the throne and said, I'm going to make everything great again. And everybody believed him, and suddenly he was on the throne and got carried away with it. And so that sort of helps to picture and just sort of find a way through, and sort of linking to those connections that we've got. And then I sort of moved on to looking at a variety of scenarios. I guess the thing is that everything that has happened since I wrote that, nothing is more clear. It's still in that strange, airy-fairy situation. It's sort of on a day-by-day thing, I'm thinking, how on earth can this continue the way it is? And then from another point of view, I look at it and I think like particularly the Paris Accord, I think the way Donald Trump handled that feels like a bit of a tipping point, that it's given everybody else the space to say, hey, we're not going to listen to what we're going to take our own pathway. We're not going to listen to you. And it really is I think, the end of the American empire. However, when I think about that, I think that the dawning of the end of the American empire happened long, long ago. And if Hillary Clinton had got in, or even if Bernie Sanders had got in, we would still be looking at the same situation in a different form. It's just that it's sort of really obvious and bizarre in the way that it's all happening.
It gives us a really interesting lens, and what I especially liked about your piece was bringing in the strength of the fairy tale, right, and bringing in that kind of language to help challenge our thinking. And again, this goes back to the macro history, and can we see these sort of deep patterns and think about it in ways that we can connect to that are really built on narratives that we understand and then in some ways are familiar. Because I think this question about familiarity and about the uniqueness of it, and certainly, again, as someone invested in kind of the post-normal perspective, I think we have to make sure that we are engaging with people in ways that they can understand and that we can make sense of, and that in some ways are not calming and getting people to take a deep breath. But I think there is that a bit of catharsis that we also need to bring to bear to this, to say, wait a second, look, we've, as Sohail's mentioned, this maybe is unique and disturbing in America, but in many places this has been the norm for some time, right? So again, a variety of perspectives and how we can bring that to bear on this as we think about moving forward. We've also got Andrew Curry, who just came in. Andrew, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. We can hear you quite well. So we've got about 5 minutes or so left in this session, but we'd love to hear your perspective. I'm not sure if you've been able to listen to us as we've been going, but we've looped around and talked about lots of things. So yeah, please feel free to chime in.
I'm sorry I'm late. I'm in an unfamiliar office and I had a big internet problems, which so I mean, obviously my perspective on this is actually we tend to ask the question the wrong way around. And really, why is the countryside or other towns conservative? The question is actually, why are the cities so radical? And actually, when you look at the votes in a number of different places, we're sort of seeing these huge splits by location around the radicalization of the cities. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I've joined so late, but I think what we're actually seeing is a kind of a last throw of some old politics, which is represented by the Trump voters, by the in the face of political grouping, the politics that 30 years after we sort of got to the third wave, we're now seeing the politics of that sort of coming through in the mainstream politics of the city. The politics you get when you've got economies which are dominated by service industries is part of the process. There's quite a lot of evidence that supports that view. Around although the cities are richer, they're also more radical. They're sort of it is in a sense the politics of identity. Identity has been sort of completely embedded in the labor process. So in terms of kind of where we go next, pathways, Sarah Robinson wrote a piece a few months back where she said basically we just need to wait for a bit. Actually age is one of the big signifiers of change here. That means you have to sort of deal with the crisis while the transition's happening.
If I could just jump on with a couple of things, John, just as we finish.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
This is where, and John, Andrew, I know that you've jumped in right at the end. I don't think we can wait because I think that the issues around our relationship with the planet are, from a systemic point of view, time-bound. And if we don't see substantial change in the next couple of decades, then, in fact, the systemic effects will overwhelm us. But I think if I could just make 3 points and kind of concluding, I think that Sohail has, as he often has with me, suggested that there is a cautionary tale for those of us that want to facilitate the future. We are facilitators. We need to hold spaces open. We don't want to become victors just a king. The second thing I think is that for the futures community, I think the conversation needs to move much more towards macro history and large systems than many of the other things that have occupied us. And finally, to Victor's point, we truly are a fantastical species because there's now a geological era called the Anthropocene, which means that we have in fact been able to change the entire condition of the spaceship, which in itself is not a good thing. You know, I just see Trump as a complete aberration of a fantastical variety, and I still cannot get that image Trump as a golf cart out of my head.
Great meme. We love it. My comments agreeing with Mike and drawing what he was saying is, one, our role in foresight. I'm much more around capability, capacity, visioning. But there's a really important part of foresight as warnings. I remember being in Pakistan in the 70s, and when General Zia rose and made that link with Ronald Reagan and basically created the Taliban, 40 years later, we're living in their future. A few minor things General Zia, Ronald Reagan did in funding bin Laden, etc. We live in their imagination, so things can go wrong. My partner, Ivana Milojevic, she saw the rise of Milosevic, who she sees very much as a Trump figure. Grandiose, nationalistic, I know the story, knows how to appeal to short-term nativistic sentiments, speaks lies, how that's ruined Yugoslavia, not for 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. So in that sense, our role is saying, look, this has happened before. Do you, as the US, wish to go this route? Now, Mike's point is, this is not now an American issue, it's a global issue now. So this is the danger he can lead us towards. Our role as futures to say, well, macro history suggests to us that yes, there are swings back and forth, and there are points of transition. We're in the middle of that point of transition. We do it's very much from the spiritual view. We slow down our breath, we get clear about our role. The second thing is the warnings. The third thing is using macro history to understand this transition. And fourth is really what we've been about, is to hold the space to facilitate pluralism, to say, let's create alternative futures. In that sense, you know, we have an important role, which, I mean, the full is important, but holding that wise space is also important to create something else.
Okay, Victor and Andrew, how about we throw it to you if you have any concluding remarks, comments, reflections?
I think, obviously, I agree with what we're trying to do in holding the space open. I think one of the things that you see around politics, precisely because of the economic shifts, is a shift towards a politics of place. But actually, the divisions that you see on right and left, one is about rights. You know, a lot of the radical left parties we've seen in Europe are basically rights-based parties, and one is about authority. And obviously, Trump is the classic example of that. But the British Conservative Party increasingly is a rights-based party. The things that we need to do in holding that space open is also to hold open, I think, the language of rights and understand that sort of those parties behave. So, one of the things, a little bit flippant when I said, maybe we have to wait. So I know the crisis is urgent, Michael. But one of the things that parties of authority-based parties are doing everywhere is, voter suppression, because actually they're trying to delay that moment as long as it can be delayed for. So everywhere we see left-leaning voters getting removed from electoral rolls. The Conservative Party's done it consistently here. Obviously in the States it's done completely blatantly. In Turkey it's been a kind, even more blatantly than in America. The thing that one has to look at in terms of futures is actually how do you defend fairness? Some people's voices are being excluded from their opinion on the future. by the political systems that they're being forced to operate in.
Yeah, and to speak to your point as well, it's been at this juncture only a collection of men discussing this, right? And as a group that's certainly committed to different perspectives and different views, something that we certainly want to remediate, right? And we want to correct as we go forward. So our hope is actually that we can continue to have those different voices and different views brought in. We had actually attempted to organize a sort of an all-female panel on this, and given the time and trying to organize it, it was a bit difficult. My hope is that we could obviously bring those voices in and really for us to step out of the space and to have different conversations. Okay, Victor, we'll let you wrap us and give us, hopefully the magic fairy can come in and we can have this different metaphor. So please, over to you.
Well, it's just interesting because in the scenario that I had where everything turned out absolutely wonderfully, the only way I could make sense of it in my head was to have this magic fairy going, sprinkling gold dust or, around on everybody, and then everybody woke up to what was happening. But I mean, for me, when I started reading about Michelle Bowens and all the work that he's doing, there's an awful lot of stuff which is the solution, or potentially the solutions. Technology, if it's used right, can be really, really helpful. There's a lot of the solutions out there. But it's a matter of can those be scaled up and put in place fast enough to cope with how quickly things are disintegrating and falling in on themselves. So that's our challenge, but lots of solutions are there if we can just choose and get in and pick them up and make them working.
Yeah, and I like the fairy tale, the metaphor, and I think that speaks really well to the point that, well, it's a really great opportunity for us to save ourselves, right? And we really have the opportunity to, again, reframe these narratives, to use the methods and tools that we have, and I think as Sohail mentioned, to focus on capability and capacity so that the next generations feel empowered to really step forward here. Okay, well, it's 5:50. We've had a chance to chat about lots of different things, to touch on many of the issues in the symposium and take them further. I want to thank all the participants and really encourage everyone to really delve into the issue. I think it's a really special piece and really starts a really great conversation. So again, our hope is that we are able to bring in a variety of voices and perspectives. So it's certainly a more diverse group next time. But thanks everyone for sticking through. And looking forward to, we have one more session coming up in a few more hours, and the conversation can also continue online. So thanks again. Check out the website, jfsdigital.org, and look forward to hearing your comments and feedbacks. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks,
John.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.